Right now, I want to welcome to the program the General Counsel for the National Shooting Sports Foundation, Mr. Larry Keane. Larry, good evening to you, sir.
How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for coming on the program tonight.
No, happy to.
I noticed at NSSF's blog today, you guys had a couple of really interesting posts. One about the myth of the 90%. This lie that was offered by the Obama administration back in 2009 that 90% of the guns recovered in Mexico can be traced back to the United States. That number was debunked to the point that eventually they stopped using it. They claimed that the number had become politicized. And since then, they floated out a couple of other additional numbers. And this has now reared its head again because in Attorney General Holder's recent letter to Representative Issa and Senator Grassley on Fast and Furious, he kind of said that Fast and Furious came about because we didn't have enough gun control laws in this country and kind of resurrected the myth of the 90%.
Yeah, I mean, talks about in his letter where in response to the criticisms about or concerns about his congressional testimony about when he first learned about Fast and Furious, he talks about, we need to reform our gun laws and we need to close loopholes so that we can stop the flood of guns going into Mexico. And as you point out, the numbers just don't add up. I mean, it's not 90%. In fact, more recently, they sent a letter to Senator Feinstein saying it was only 70%, and even that is not a real number. The actual number, it seems, to be more in the order of 12%. And what we learned very recently, within the last 2 weeks or so, in our lawsuit against ATF over the multiple sales reporting, is that the average age of the guns that are recovered and successfully traced in Mexico, they're 15 years old. That's older than we had previously been told by ATF, which was 14 years. So these guns that are allegedly now flooding over the border went there on average 15 years ago after a background check. So, that this just doesn't really add up. And, and we also found, we learned that very, very few firearms retailers sold more than one gun that was recovered in Mexico within the past 3 years. An even smaller percentage of the dealers along the border sold more than one rifle that was later recovered in Mexico with what the ATF calls a time to crime of 3 years or less, which they think is an indicator of trafficking, and it's an incredibly small number. I mean, 100 and something,
right?
Less than 200, and yet ATF has imposed a requirement upon all dealers, 8,500 dealers along the southwest border, to report multiple sales. And if these are supposed to be indicators of trafficking, they're not there. So why not just ask that few segment of dealers that have multiple trace requests from ATF for information? Again, tracing doesn't mean the dealer or anybody did anything wrong, but to impose this requirement on everybody is very onerous. And of course, the Gun Control Act just doesn't give them the authority to make that request.
Well, absolutely right. And we were actually just talking with Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch about this, the end run around Congress that this administration has done on this issue. And again, I think singling out these FFLs as if they are the problem here, it's fascinating. I mean, you talk about these numbers, Larry. Going back to the rhetoric that we've heard from this administration, I mean, they've talked about, an iron river of guns flowing from the U.S. into Mexico. I thought it was interesting. Apparently, there was a diplomatic cable from the U.S. Embassy in Mexico to our State Department that said, no. There is no iron river of guns here. There are trickles. There are low-level straw buyers who are shipping 1-2 guns a month across the border into the hands of the cartels. But he wasn't seeing an iron river of guns.
No.
And all of a sudden, I mean, the iron river that we know about was Operation Fast and Furious.
Well, part of one of the questions I think for ATF to answer as part of our lawsuit is exactly that. When you crunch these trace numbers to decide which dealers should be required to provide this multiple sales reporting, did you back out the guns you knew were sold as part of Fast and Furious or Operation Wide Receiver?
Right.
I mean, because I'm sure one or more of these dealers that were cooperating with ATF would show up on that list of dealers that had more than one rifle traced as being, sold and then recovered in Mexico. And so clearly those dealers were not doing anything wrong, yet that was not accounted for or discussed in the administrative record that ATF produced in the litigation. So they didn't appear to take that into account.
One other thing I want to ask you about, Larry, because you were talking about this as well on the NSSF blog today. Is it true that the DOJ has pulled funding for the Don't Lie for the Other Guy program?
We have not received, we used to, years ago, receive grants from the Department of Justice for the Don't Lie program, but we have not received one in several years, despite our asking DOJ to continue to fund the program. And so in his letter to Congress, he talks about, Attorney General Holder talks about, the problem being straw purchasers. And so if the problem is straw purchasing, why not fund the program called Don't Lie for the Other Guy that's done in cooperation with retailers to, prevent straw purchasing that ATF has called vital and very helpful. Unfortunately, we don't have the fund. We wish we had grant funding. It would be useful to be able to spread the message and stop straw purchasing. Of course, it's troubling when we see that ATF was facilitating straw purchases.
Yeah, well, absolutely right. And it just, on the one hand, as the Attorney General says, this is something that needs to be combated. For the DOJ to no longer support a program that told people of the consequences of becoming a straw buyer. That just seemed a little odd to me.
Well, it's like the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, if Don't Lie was an ounce of prevention, Fast and Furious was cancer.
Well, yeah, absolutely right. Hey, Larry, listen, I'm glad you could be with us on the program this evening, sir, and hope we can do this again. Very sorry, by the way, to hear that neither my Yankees or my Red Sox nor your Yankees made it to the World Series this year.
Well, we still have the Giants to root for now, so.
Yeah, that'd be the royal we. I'm a Patriots guy, but Larry, thank you again, sir, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Always a pleasure.
Larry Keane, the General Counsel and Vice President for the National Shooting Sports Foundation.